I really like that. Okay. All right, so let's get to it. Wow, I'm in a really interesting space all of a sudden. Something really interesting is gonna happen, and I'm just gonna try to hurry up and get there so it can happen. So, one of the things we were talking about a few minutes ago at the gas station was about this feeling that I had when we were leaving Somerville, that the conversation you had just mentioned to me reminded me of a prior conversation. I think you were talking about, what were you talking about in the car before you got up?
A couple of things, mainly the idea of when questions arise in your mind, take you back to a prior time, that same question that been asked before.
Yeah.
And you got the answer then, or I got the answer then.
Yeah.
And it brings you back to the present question, and gives you the answer then, and the energy that it expounds and releases from knowing.
Yeah. So I think I was trying to describe how something that you said just before you got out of the car reminded me of a prior question. Do you remember what it was that you said, what I was talking about? It was
Sunday school. What were you saying?
Yeah, Sunday school was one of them. The one about Sunday school was this. I decided that I could no longer sit in a Sunday school classroom because everybody else's frame of reference as to what truth was the paperback book that had been published that everybody was reading from. And because I had always been educated by masters, I had a different source of questions that went outside the bounds of what everybody else was looking at. And so I would interrupt a simple question or simple conversation with a question that had come up when I previously looked at that passage of scripture, and I began to be accused as being disruptive when everybody else were going about learning the lesson as it had been printed, as it had been outlined, without raising any questions that weren't on the text. And for me, it became a very uncomfortable situation to sit there while someone was glossing over major gaps or inconsistencies or questions. And it's like I began to be the villain or the bad guy, and I didn't like feeling that way anymore. So I quit going to Sunday school because of that, and that tied into the experience that you were saying. The exact, it just said that we had already had the conversation about you, but I didn't know it was in the context of Sunday school.
Right, just happened to bring it up at that moment, man. I had the same similar situation many years ago. Just listening to what the deacon was saying during our conversations in Sunday school and the facts they were spewing out from the books that they had at that time. Yet and still that they weren't understanding what they had in front of them versus the people who they were speaking to. Now, you come from an area where you think you know and you trust these people and you trust the intellect they try to put down on us. However, when you do come up with a question and they don't have answers, instead of them telling you, I'm not sure, maybe I should get back to you, or maybe I need to research that a little more, they'll gloss over, like you said, the facts, or they'll smudge and pudge on different ideas of what they've heard, but not sure about the facts themselves. My biggest altercation took place at 15 years old at Sunday school, due to a deacon, some other people there at the church, just the idea of the sermon that he was speaking to those masters that were there, which was the young people who was coming there to learn something. he didn't know or understand that he was hurting some of those same people he's trying to spew this information up to. Derogatory statements, discriminatory statements, statements that were just untrue, that he couldn't back them, and when asked about those certain questions or how he think other people might feel, this ominous type of attitude that I speak from the Lord, or I am the Lord speaking, so this is what you should follow. Brought up an altercation where I had to expose certain elements of people, mainly one of his children, that you know that he was so ominous about his aspect of raising a God-fearing child, a devout Christian, but understanding that he's hurting his son every time that he spoke these words because his son was not the Christian he thought he was. So when that moment happened where the truth and the questions that I brought up had to be answered, of course they got glossed over and that become a problem or a person of problems there. You know, within weeks, you know, certain other questions would arouse and people would look at you funny like as if I did something wrong. And all I did was pose a question to the people or to the sermon he was speaking about that day, considering I'm looking at his own son right beside me crying like this can't be true because it's hurting what I'm saying, what I'm hearing. If these are the words of God, why is he crying? So when I couldn't take no more, and when I had to express the point, well, give me some answers or you're a bunch of hypocrites, stuff hit the fan. And then, you know, I had to just put things where they were. My perspective is that this is an open-minded conversation. God's about finding out the truth, about figuring out the truth, about researching and searching. So let's explore that, not just discriminate and call out people by names and, you know who you're hurting and who you should be bringing into this fold. Part of the problems with the institutions of this world, part of the problems we find and we face every day. They're still going through this every day. I got friends who are in the church every day. They have alternative sex, alternative creeds, alternative everything. But when they leave there, they want to feel so good about the right word, the word. But the words being espoused to them is hurting them. They're still crying like, you will never be truly accepted into these institutions until we become part of them or build our own. To rival equality of what they think is right and moral.
I think one of the major flaws in most of the institutions that exist now is that there is, to be understood, a class of people who are regarded as priests in the institution and a much larger class of people who are regarded as parishioners of institutions. I believe the new institutions that have to be constructed now have to presume that everybody in the institution is a priest with equal power, equal authority, equal access, and equal information, so that we no longer have to depend on someone else's interpretation to understand the voice of God or know what it is that we're supposed to do. We seek that and discover that for ourselves. One of the things that I have begun to discover more now than at any time before is the parishioners welcome relationship with me, because by nature, I don't see them as being other. I see them as being priests. And so I talk and equip and facilitate relationships with them the same way as I would with anybody else. But that is a challenge to the institutional paradigm. The institutional paradigm says, well, these are priests and these are parishioners. This is the way you talk to priests and this is the way you talk to parishioners. And what I'm discovering, just like you just mentioned, anytime you have to rely on a man to be the mediator between yourself and God, you are necessarily setting yourself up for a major disappointment. The question is, will that disappointment come at a time of crisis such that you will be able to eventually rise above that disappointment and begin to seek a relationship with God himself? Or will that conflict come at a time when it destroys not only your faith in the institution, but your faith in God, such that not only do you never end up restoring the relationship between you and the institution, you end up walking away from God entirely, saying, if God would allow this institution to hurt me, then he must not be in it, or must not be loving, one of the two. So there's so many things that can happen from this point. Just whatever you're thinking about, just go and say it.
The paradigm we just put together is what most people are having a problem with.